On November 15th, 2019, we received one of the best, if not the best, Star Wars game of all time, Jedi Fallen Order. This was a time where the fandom was as split as ever, from disappointing theatrical releases to video games plagued by pay-to-win mechanics. Star Wars was in a pretty bad place, but Respawn Entertainment and, shockingly enough, EA were able to do the unthinkable and gave us all what we desperately wanted, a great Star Wars story. With its sequel just around the corner, I couldn't think of a better time to revisit Fallen Order and not only recap the game, but also dive into what made it so great. Set 5 years after Revenge of the Sith, we start off on the junkyard planet Bracca, where we find our main protagonist, Cal Kestis, a Jedi who survived Order 66 and has spent his years in seclusion as a scrapper. During this time, we also meet Cal's friend Prath, whose life is immediately put in danger after an accident takes place, forcing Cal to use the Force to save his life, and in turn exposing him as a Jedi. Prath promised to keep Cal's secret safe, but an Imperial probe droid saw everything and reported him immediately to the Empire, and in no time, 2 Sith Inquisitors arrived on Bracca in search for this elusive Jedi. With things looking hairy, Prath made the ultimate sacrifice play and stepped forward to take a stance, but was killed for his efforts. In retaliation, Cal ignites his lightsaber, thus revealing his identity. After being pushed onto a moving train, we get the opportunity to experience lightsaber combat for the first time. Heavily inspired by the Dark Souls series, combat can be extremely challenging at times, especially on the higher difficulties, and I feel like this is where the game truly shines. With a strong focus on perfectly timed parries and blocks, combat requires a degree of skill and precision, rather than being just a button mashing hack and slash experience, and will definitely punish you if you don't dodge or block incoming attacks in time. Some enemies such as basic stormtroopers can be disposed in a simple strike or deflected blaster shot. However, others will require you to deplete their stamina bar before being able to inflict damage. After clearing out the train, we are intercepted by one of the Inquisitors, being the second sister. It's clear that at this stage, Cal is no match for her, but luckily we are saved by a starship which we find out to be the Stinger Mantis. This is where we meet its pilot Greez Dritus and former Jedi Cere Junda. Once aboard, we find out that there might be a way to restore the Jedi Order, but to do so, we must venture to Bogano. Upon arrival, we meet BD-1, our droid companion who helps us gain access into the vault on the planet. BD projects an old message from Master Eno Cordova, who was Cere's old mentor. After foreseeing the fall of the Jedi, he hid a holocron inside this vault, and on it contains a list of Force-sensitive children around the galaxy, which Cal can use to help rebuild the Jedi Order. Something this game does extremely well is jump straight into the action and set the stakes from the word go. Cal's being hunted by the Empire, he loses his only friend and has a lightsaber versus lightsaber fight all in the first hour. Now he has a new mission of rebuilding the Jedi Order, giving Cal a goal, or dare I say, a new hope. Forgive me for the cheesiness, but honestly the first few hours of this game are near perfection. Cal learns that to gain access to the Jedi holocron, he must first complete a series of trials to prove himself worthy, the first of which is found on the ancient planet of Zepho. But before we do this, we can explore around a little bit and get our grip on the controls, platforming, and general gameplay. You'll mostly deal with small critters and creatures on Bogano, and being the first planet, they don't prove to be much of a challenge.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
This isn't over. I will come back, and I will find out what's inside that chest. Back on track, we travel to Zepho, and upon arrival, we are met with some Imperial resistance who have taken over the planet. We fight our way through hordes of stormtroopers in search for the Tomb of Ilram, which is the first of 3 tombs Cal will have to complete in order to unlock the vault. Along the way, you will find different collectibles, some coming in the form of secrets, encrypted logs, and Force echoes, all of which providing background information and lore explore onto the larger story at hand. And for the die-hard Star Wars fans, I can see that finding these can prove to be extremely rewarding. Majority of the collectibles, however, reward you with simple cosmetics, such as skins for BD1 and the Mantis, as well as different lightsaber parts and ponchos. Lightsaber customization is extremely cool and a standout feature, but sadly, exploration and tracking down collectibles isn't as rewarding or exciting as it should be. And that's because 9 out of 10 times, all you will get for your efforts is a different colored poncho.
Poncho and poncho. 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 It's mostly poncho. Poncho? Poncho and Cameron!
Fallen Order definitely takes a Metroidvania approach to its level design. For instance, the first time we visit Zepho, we will only be able to explore and collect 20% of what the planet has to offer. And to fully complete it, you will have to return later down the line after you've unlocked new Force abilities and skills. One of these is Force Push, which we learn after entering the Tomb of Ilram. After completing several puzzles and exploring the tomb, we learn from another message that the Wookiee chief Tarful might be able to help us on our journey. And to find him, we must head to the planet Kashyyyk. But as we return back to the Mantis, we get ambushed by an AT-ST. After deflecting incoming blaster shots, hacking at its feet, and pushing rockets into its face, the mech eventually falls. And once we savagely murder the pilot, we get to reunite with the crew. And here we find out the reason why Cere has disconnected herself from the Force. After escaping Order 66, she went into hiding with her Padawan Trilla and a group of younglings. She was eventually captured and tortured by the Empire, who wanted her to reveal the location of the others and information regarding Eno Cordova. They were able to break Cere and get the intel they wanted, but she was able to escape. Unfortunately, her Padawan Trilla wasn't as lucky. We then head to Kashyyyk in search of Tarful, and I have to say, it's probably my favorite of all the planets in Fallen Order. We jump out of the Mantis Warzone style and land in some sort of swampy lake area, where we have to climb onto an Imperial walker. The visuals in this sequence are not only nostalgic from the Battle of Hoth, but are also breathtaking. We break our way in and chop down all the troopers inside. From here we hijack the walker and blast our way through the Imperial forces. Next we meet up with Saw Gerrera and his resistant fighters, who are helping the Wookiees by cutting off Imperial supply lines. We learn of an Imperial refinery up ahead where some Wookiees are being held prisoner. Being the good Jedi Knight we are, we decide to lend a helping hand, and along the way we get to enjoy Kashyyyk for all of its beauty.
Ugly motherfucker.
After making our way through the refinery and taking out waves of stormtroopers, we eventually free all the Wookiees and save the day. Although Tarful is nowhere to be seen, one of the Wookiees we saved said that he will do what he can to track him down. In the meantime, we head back to Zepho as we hear reports that the Empire is closing in on another tomb. Zepho is by far the biggest of all the planets in Fallen Order, and with no fast travel in the game, you have to rely on BD1's holo map to get around.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
You could probably walk into a Japanese language school and have a better clue what the fuck is going on than you would trying to understand this map. You can't set markers or waypoints, and with most planets having multiple layers and levels, navigation can easily become a chore. In saying that, the more and more you play and use the map, the more you will understand it. But by this point in your playthrough, you've likely finished the game. One of the only positive features regarding the map is the indicators highlighting whether or not something is accessible, and more times than not, following the green available areas will take you where you want to go. After venturing through Zepho, we come across a crashed Venator, and inside we stumble into an Imperial dig site. In here we are met by none other than the second sister, who is also in pursuit of the holocron. We engage in another fight with her, which ends by BD1 activating a ray shield just as she is about to strike us down, and then we find out that the second sister is actually Trilla.
In the flesh.
Her story is actually really compelling and well executed. Her reveal may have been slightly premature, but it doesn't take away from the narrative at all. All I'm saying is Disney should definitely take notes on how to do an Inquisitor story, because this shit sucked. Something I love is how you can really see the duality between Cal and Trilla, which makes them such good characters. Both of them survived Order 66, where they lost their masters in one way or another, and now they have to deal with the trauma of that throughout the story. Trilla chooses the route of vengeance vengeance and hatred as she feels betrayed by Cere, whereas Cal has survivor's guilt and feels responsible for not being there to help Gyro to pole. But at the end of the day, they're both dealing with the aftermath of the purge in their own ways. Following this, we continue to explore as we find the Tomb of Mictril, which is filled with puzzles. And look, I don't know if it's because I'm a massive drone, but this one where you have to lift the lanterns and burn the vines, yeah, that took me an embarrassingly long amount of time. I'm pretty sure I ended up having to Google how to solve it. And this was the case for a couple puzzles along the way. Majority are simple and linear, and as you progress, there's usually an obvious answer, like pushing a bowl into a hole or pulling an object so you can climb it. But some can be a little challenging and extremely confusing at first, which honestly, it is a good thing because you don't want it to be too easy. But I have to admit, this one in particular did kind of hurt my brain a little. After progressing some more, we eventually complete the tomb, revealing another message from Cordova, who tells us that to unlock the vault, we must first find an ancient Zepho artifact called an Astrium. From here, we make our way back to the Mantis, but on the way, we stumble into a boss fight with a bounty hunter who fully destroys me. And it turns out that this was a necessary defeat, as when we wake up, we find ourselves kidnapped in a Haxian Brood bounty hunter base. After escaping and grabbing BD-1, we make our way to a fighting pit, where we get put up against waves of different enemies to take on. And the reasoning behind all of this is because our buddy Greez has a large gambling debt to this syndicate. But after defeating the final bounty hunter, we are saved by the Mantis and are able to escape. Cal confronts Cere about Trilla, but is interrupted by a call from Kashyyyk, saying that Tarful has been found and is willing to meet. So we return back to Kashyyyk, and with our new force abilities, we are able to explore new areas, leading us deep into the jungle where we eventually meet up with Tarful, who tells us that we will find the answers we're looking for at the top of the origin tree. We work our way up the tree, fighting off spiders and other creatures, until eventually we meet up with the ninth sister, who shoots at us, dropping us down to the biggest slip and slide ever. And as we make our way down, a giant bird swoops out of nowhere and takes out the Inquisitor's ship. We catch up to the creature, who has got a piece of the ship stuck in its wing. Using the force, we are able to remove the piece of metal, and as a thank you, the bird gives us a lift to the top of the origin tree. Here we find out that the Astrium needed to unlock the vault is found in a tomb on Dathomir. But before we can get there, we are interrupted by the ninth sister.
Let's make this quick.
We arrive on Dathomir soon after, where we are greeted by the Night Sister Merrin, who tells us to leave as she blames the Jedi for the massacre of her people during the Clone Wars. We fight our way through, taking on several Night Brother warriors, until we are greeted by this strange wanderer, who warns us not to go into the ruins. And of course, we completely ignore his advice, because who the fuck would listen to this guy? He's creepy as shit. As we make our way over, we get a rock thrown at us, causing us to fall down to the lower layers of Dathomir. Here we meet Merrin again, who raises her dead sisters as zombies to kill us.
Smash.
We eventually stumble into this cavern area which screams boss fight. Yeah, that'll about do it. Golgara is definitely a boss designed for the cinematics, and once we get its health pretty low, it climbs out and escapes. Luckily for us, we find these new climbing claws and are able to chase it down. Or rather, it chase us down. We then have to paraglide down and attempt to land on its back as we descend, and eventually it smashes into some rocks and dies. Now with our new climbing claws, we can finally reach the tomb, and once we get inside, Cal gets a flashback to Order 66, where we play through the events that allowed him to escape as a Padawan. Even replaying this 3 years later, this whole sequence still gives me chills. From seeing Sidious give the order on the hologram, to hearing Anakin's betrayal play in the background. It captures the intensity and severity of the moment perfectly. Cal awakens to a nightmare where he kills his master, enforcing that his blood is on Cal's hands, and that he is a failure, a traitor, and no Jedi. In his rage, Cal shatters the Kyber crystal in his lightsaber, rendering it completely useless. Exiting the chamber, he is greeted by the Wanderer, who reveals himself to be Taron Malicos, a former Jedi who survived the Purge and retreated to Dathomir, where the darkness of the planet has consumed him. Malicos offers Cal to join him to control the power that Dathomir has to offer. Merrin then appears, and we find out that Malicos is the one who turned her against the Jedi, and only seeks to use her as a mean to learn the Night Sister magic and gain more power. She then decides to do what she does best and raise a bunch of zombie witches from the ground that we have to escape from. After sprinting back to the Mantis, Cal reveals his broken lightsaber to Cere and opens up about what he saw in the tomb. They both exchange a strong heart-to-heart and state that they they can't change the past, but have the chance to change the future. So from here they head to the planet Ilum, where Cal will be able to repair his lightsaber. After venturing through the frosty planet, Cal is able to find a new kyber crystal and restore his weapon. However, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, as the Empire were hot on Cal's tail, but after slicing through some of their forces, we were able to make it back to the Mantis and head to Dathomir to face Cal's fears. This time round, Cal puts his lightsaber away and refuses to fight Jaro Tapal. Instead, he embraces the loss of his master and overcomes the guilt that he feels from Order 66. This in turn unlocks the door to the tomb, where inside we find Taron Malicos, who makes one last plea for Cal to join him. And I have to admit, some of the points he makes are extremely valid, like how the Jedi Order was stifled by tradition, which resulted in them being blinded by the endless war and return of the Sith. But still, Cal says no and the fight begins. This was peak combat for me during the playthrough. At this point, Cal has a bunch of new attacks and abilities, but despite this, it still proved to be a really tough challenge. Between having to focus on parries and deal counters and dodge unblockable attacks, I can say it took me many attempts to defeat Malicos, but still, it never became tedious or annoying. About halfway through the fight, we also get the assistance of Merrin, and soon enough, we were able to take out the fallen Jedi. After the fight, Merrin decides to team up with Cal and join the Mantis. We grab the Astrium and return to the ship with our new crew member. On the way to Bogano, Merrin makes a good point that the children on the holocron will also be hunted just like Cal is. And after reaching the vault and using the Astrium to obtain the holocron, Cal gets visions of this reality, where the Padawans he would train whilst rebuilding the Jedi Order would ultimately be slain and tracked down by the Empire. He also sees himself turn into an Inquisitor. Speaking of, Trilla arrives just as Cal goes to grab the holocron, and after a short fight, Cal disarms her. But as soon as he touches her lightsaber, he sees a vision of the moment when Trilla became an Inquisitor, as she puts her helmet on right in front of her former master. In her rage, Cere tapped into the dark side of the Force and was able to escape. When Cal snaps back to reality, Trilla is gone, and so is the holocron. Cal then apologizes to Cere, as now he realizes what actually happened to her when she was being tortured by the Empire. They embrace, and Cere reveals that she knows where Trilla might have taken the holocron, the Fortress Inquisitorius on Ner. She then officially knights Cal, declaring him a Padawan no more, but now a Jedi Knight. We travel to Ner and make our way inside the Inquisitor base. After dealing with hordes of enemies, we eventually make it to the torture chamber. Once inside, we are attacked by Trilla, and a final boss fight begins. And I know I said Taron Malicos was tough, but this takes it to an entirely different level. Her first stage is fairly simple, having a standard set of combos and blockable attacks, but in the second phase, this is where I struggled most. She has a ground slam attack that sends a shockwave which inflicts damage, and if she does this when you're up and close, there's little to no chance of dodging it. After several attempts, 0 stims, and not a lot of health, I was able to finally take her out. We get the holocron, and Cere gets a final moment with Trilla, where she apologizes for the decision she made and for failing her. Here we see a full circle moment for the two, returning to being Master and Padawan, and something to commend Respawn for is how they treated their characters. From Cal, Cere, Trilla, Merrin, and heck even Taron Malicos, all characters have their own fleshed out stories and arcs, which develop over the course of the 15-hour game, and is a major reason why the game is so great. In this moment, it appears that Trilla is going to come around, but then we hear this. Vader slays down Trilla, sends Cere flying, and has a face-off with Cal. They designed this so perfectly, as this is Vader in his prime, and Cal isn't able to land a single hit, and instead is thrown around like a ragdoll. We then get an epic escape sequence, where we have to parkour our way out while Vader uses the Force to throw objects our way. And after making it through, it appears that we've evaded the Sith Lord. But he's Darth Vader, so of course we haven't. With BD-1's assistance and the return of Cere, Cal is able to use the Force to break the glass in the walls and swim away to safety, thus escaping with the holocron. After returning to the Mantis, Cal decides to destroy the holocron instead of using it, leaving the fate of all the children to the Force. But the story doesn't finish here. Finally, after all this time, I will find out what's inside this chest.
Poncho?